This man is no ordinary doctor. He can perform extremely difficult surgeries that no other doctor can do. Today, there was a patient with an extremely critical abdominal artery rupture. If he didn't have surgery, he would die in just a few minutes. Unexpectedly, when brought this patient to the hospital, they refused to admit him because all the surgeons are busy. Even though the patient's family members were crying and miserable, the doctor still coldly chased them away. Young Min is an intern doctor. When he saw this scene, he couldn't bear it. He courageously received this surgery, but the dean still chased them away and said, Young Min was an intern, so how could he know how to do surgery? Young Min directly clung to the hospital bed to block. It is true that when the gods are too busy, the devil takes the throne. Suddenly, something entered Young Min's body, making his eyes glow. An extremely difficult surgery that a trainee doctor like Young Min performed successfully. Since then, Young Min's career has risen like a kite in the wind. Young Min is called a professor because only he can afford to perform super difficult surgeries. But because of his outstanding surgical ability, Young Min also arrogantly sets the rules. He only saves people who have at least a 1% chance of survival. In cases of cardiac arrest, he refused treatment. Today, another patient died, and Young Min did not accept it. It seemed he knew in advance which patients would die. Young Min performed many of the hospital's most difficult surgeries. Therefore, he is even more arrogant and consider himself the best. But the turning point happened when one person appeared. Sung Tak is a newly arrived intern and also the nephew of the hospital president. Sung Tak's personality is the opposite of Young Min. When he goes to work, there are bodyguards accompanying him to carry things. This made Young Min have a grudge against him from the first day. After asking a few questions, Young Min learned that Sung Tak's grandfather was the president of the hospital. Sung Tak will definitely be the heir to this hospital. Hearing that Young Min despised this guy even more, Young Min went to tell the dean that he refused to accept this intern. But unexpectedly, the director personally asked him to teach Sung Tak. Young Min immediately went to find Sung Tak to teach him a lesson. He asked Sung Tak the most difficult questions in medicine. Unexpectedly, Sung Tak answered every question correctly. Seeing that it doesn't make it difficult for Sung Tak in theory, Young Min starts forcing Sung Tak to watch him practice surgery. Today, a patient had heart surgery for the 5th time, but because the risks were too high, even the head of the department did not dare to perform the surgery. In the entire country, there is only Young Min who can afford surgery. Young Min directly asked Sung Tak to assist him. Young Min has a habit of warming up his hands before performing difficult surgery. Any surgery Young Min performs will be successful. Sure enough, after 2 hours, the surgery was successful. However, when Young Min asked Sung Tak to remove the drainage tube, he stiffened and his limbs trembled. Young Min suddenly discovered that Sung Tak was very afraid of practicing, so he deliberately humiliated Sung Tak in front of the other trainees. When a patient is in critical condition, they will choose a gruff doctor like Young Min, or they will choose someone who only talks but doesn't know how to act like Sung Tak. Sung Tak was humiliated, but it was the truth, so he didn't dare say anything. Sung Tak was then transferred to the emergency room to be on duty. Here Sung Tak feels like a useless person when he can't do anything. Even taking the patient's blood is difficult. When welcoming patients, he was punched by them. Over here, the son of the tycoon chairman asked Young Min to perform heart surgery for his father. No matter how much it cost, he would pay. But Young Min said the chairman had too many underlying diseases. If they tried surgery, he would die. Unexpectedly, the son insisted that Young Min do it. This son's real purpose is to want his father to have surgery and then die to take over the family fortune. Young Min was taken by Jin Suk to visit his chairman's father. Young Min suddenly realized that this was his ex-lover's father, and his ex-lover Se-jin also appeared here. She was also a doctor studying abroad in the US. Young Min still hates meeting his ex-lover because in the past she broke up with him because he was too poor. Because she is a doctor, Se-jin clearly understands that her father cannot have heart surgery. Young Min also knows that, but he wants to show her how good he is now. If a doctor like her who studied abroad doesn't dare accept the surgery, he will make her regret leaving him. Young Min immediately went back to his room to get blouse. Very soon, the president's heart surgery began. Because he had many underlying health conditions, Young Min had to try best to race against death. He knew this surgery could fail, but because he wanted to prove it to his ex-lover, he did it regardless. To avoid falling asleep during the process, he had to constantly yell. After 10 hours, the surgery was successful, but while waiting for the president to wake up, a sinister plot was carried out. Young Min and a colleague, was Dr. Taehyun, kept watch at the chairman's bedside. But Young Min doesn't know that Taehyun is a people of the sun who wants to harm the president. Young Min suddenly received a text message from his ex-lover to meet up. He didn't suspect anything and asked Taehyun to keep an eye on the president. He then left to meet his ex. Taehyun stayed and immediately carried out the plot. Young Min arrived at the meeting point but did not see Se-jin. While in a bewildered, his colleagues reported that the chairman was in critical condition, so Young Young Min quickly drove back to the hospital. At the same time, a delivery man was hired to cause an accident for Young Min. While waiting for the red light, he turned to confirm his prey. When Young Min walked a short distance, the delivery man frantically chased after him without Young Min even knowing. He suddenly blocked the car in front, causing Young Min to dodge and have a serious accident. Young Min woke up and tried to get out of the car. The person who hit him with a motorbike also lay unconscious here. Young Min checked his neck's pulse, but his arm went through his arm. When he wanted to give first aid, his arm also went through his chest. Young Min was shocked and did not understand what happened. He walked over and saw his body still slumped there. It turned out that his soul had left his body. The weaker the body, the more the soul disappears. Young Min had to sit in the ambulance with his body to the hospital. Here his colleagues rushed to give him first aid. Young Min just looked at and knew how to save him, but his colleagues didn't know what to do. The only person on main duty here is trainee Sung Tak. Fortunately, Sung Tak is good at theory, so he can read the disease. Sung Tak said Young Min needed urgent surgery or he would die. But the hospital today does not have any surgical doctors. Sung Tak holds a scalpel but does not dare to do it, while Young Min's blood pressure is dropping and Young Min's life is in danger. Young Min's soul tried to reach for the knife to perform surgery but could not. Now he is extremely helpless. Seeing that Young Min was about to die, Sung Tak risked taking a scalpel. Young Min screams, could it be that Sung Tak is taking revenge on him? Sung Tak was shaking and out of breath. When he put the knife down, Young Min suddenly held Sung Tae's hand to stop him. As a result, Young Min's soul entered Sung Tak's body. Sung Tak was immediately controlled by Young Min. Young Min made the same gesture as usual, then shouted and began performing the surgery very skillfully. So Young Min's soul is undergoing surgery to save his own body. He mastered suturing the tear in his heart, which was extremely difficult. The successful surgery stabilized his blood pressure. Young Min's soul also returned to his body. Sung Tak woke up not understanding what happened, but suddenly Young Min's blood pressure dropped sharply. His soul was thus out body again, but because he was too weak, his soul could not re-enter Sung Tak's body. Sung Tak therefore doesn't know what to do anymore. The surgeons had no one else because they were all busy with the chairman's emergency. Young Min's soul collapsed because he was about to lose his life. At the critical moment, Taehyun was able to return and quickly perform surgery on the torn left ventricle. The surgery was completed very quickly, but Taehyun deliberately did some procedure that caused Young Min's body to fall into a deep coma, not knowing when he would wake up. Young Min was extremely confused. He tried everything to get his soul back into his body, but couldn't. He didn't want himself to die like that. Outside, the female doctor interrogates Sung Tak. She asked him if he was possessed by Young Min's spirit. Why did you do the same surgery gesture as Young Min? But Sung Tak denied, saying that he was actually very good at surgery, but had been hiding it for a long time. On this side, Young Min was keeping watch over his body when he suddenly discovered that the drainage tube had been pulled out. It seemed like someone wanted him to be unconscious forever. Young Min's soul tried to enter another doctor's body to reattach it, but it failed. Unexpectedly, the cleaning lady here could hear and see him. She immediately helped him attach the tube, then greeted him, making Young Min extremely surprised. Young Min followed and found out that the cleaning lady was also possessed by a spirit. That spirit is Uncle Teth. Uncle Teth has been a ghost for a long time, so he knows everything. So he explains to Young Min the rules of ghosts. That is, the soul cannot be more than 100 meters away from its body. Furthermore, if you enter many other people, you will not be able to enter your body again in the future. Since then, Young Min has been looking out for himself because his personality is very harsh and unpleasant to everyone, so no one comes to visit him. Every day, only intern Sung Tak comes to visit him. Sung Tak could see Young Min's ghost, but he pretended not to see it so Young Min wouldn't bother him. Young Min kept following Sung Tak, but was suddenly blocked by an invisible wall. This is the line that he cannot cross. Uncle Teth explained that the soul can only travel a maximum distance of 100 meters from the body. If it wants to go anywhere, it must ask someone to take the comatose body with it. Young Min stood looking at his body helplessly. Young Min was about to give up when Sejin's father's soul came here. The chairman said Young Min had to come back to life to save him. Young Min ran to the room where the chairman was lying to find out the reason, but when he got to the door, he met Sejin there. Sejin wanted to visit her father, but her brother's bodyguard wouldn't let her in. The older brother didn't want Sejin to come in and save the father from waking up. Anyway, he wants his father to die to take over the inheritance. Sejin couldn't visit his father, so she had to leave. She sat and sobbed because she couldn't do anything. Young Min saw her crying and suddenly felt guilty, so he entered his soul into Sung Tak's body to see how the chairman was doing. At this time, an emergency case was brought in, and the patient was seriously injured in the abdomen, so Sung Tak immediately put his hand into the patient's stomach, and with just one simple operation, he showed the treatment method. Then he went to Uncle Teth to ask how to escape the soul from the body. Here Uncle Teth showed showed Young Min how to release his soul from Sung-tak's body. Once again, Sung-tak doesn't remember what just happened. The female colleague told Sung-tak that thanks to his recent diagnoses, the patient's life was saved. She doesn't understand why Sung-tak is suddenly so good. On this side, Young Min went into the hospital room to visit the chairman, and the chairman's soul also sat right next to him. At this moment, the ungrateful son walked in. He cursed his father for being so stupid. If dad listened to daughter had not had surgery, he would still be alive. The two souls were shocked to discover that the son was the one who harmed the father. Jin-seok then went upstairs to meet the hospital director. It turns out that he and the director cooperated to inject drugs to harm the chairman, and at the same time arranged for a delivery man to cause an accident for Young Min so that he wouldn't be able to return in time to save the chairman. At the same time, Taehyun, the person who murdered the president, brought his colleagues to examine Young Min. Because was in a deep coma, Young Min was transferred to a special room. Here are all patients with no chance of recovery. Taehyun said these were the patients Young Min abandoned in the past because they had no chance to live. Unexpectedly, Young Min will also have to lie here one day. The words made Young Min freeze. He suddenly realized that in the past it was really bad of him to abandon his patients. He was startled and turned around to see the souls of these patients here. These ghosts seemed to hate him. Young Min felt very regretful for refusing to treat them before. So every time he saw a seriously injured patient in need of urgent surgery, Young Min couldn't help but borrow Sung-tak's body, confidently instructing the superior doctors. After each successful surgery, Sung-tak becomes a hero that many trainees admire. Since then, Sung-tak felt like there was something unusual about him, so he reviewed the surveillance cameras and then used his power to ask security to delete all those videos. Because he was so tired of having his soul enter his body many times, Sung-tak took a day off from work and stayed home to play games. Unexpectedly, something big happened at the hospital that day. Young Min's body was transferred to another place. He quickly ran back to the room to find doctors standing around. Young Min hurriedly went to find Sung-tak to enter his soul into Sung-tak's body, but could not find. At this time, Taehyun met the director and asked to let Young Min stay, but did not expect to be scolded by the director. The director told Taehyun not to forget that he was the one who harmed Young Min to get a professorship, and he was the one who injected poison into the chairman that day to help the son harm his father to take over the fortune. On this side, Young Min is still worriedly running everywhere looking for Sung-tak. He was shocked to see the dean bringing the bed cart. At this moment, Sung-tak came and secretly pushed his body away. After a while, the housewife came to help push him into the elevator, and at the same time stopped the dean when chased him there. Sung-tak pushed it away for a while and was caught by the director. While not knowing how to explain, Sejin came. She did not allow anyone to touch Young Min. Director Han came to find his mother and found out that Sejin was Young Min's guardian. He angrily said that ever since his younger brother Sung-tak came to work, the hospital was in chaos, but his mother still ordered Director Han to help his younger brother. Later, Sejin was at Young Min's bedside. She regretted leaving him in the past. Young Min suddenly realized she still loved him. He followed her, but was eventually stopped by the 100m boundary. Young Min was extremely sad. At this moment, Sung-tak passed by, so he borrowed Sung-tak's body to run after his ex-lover. Because he couldn't see her, he took the car and drove away. That day, Young Min drove around all day until night in the form of Sung-tak. Unfortunately, while walking on the street, he accidentally bumped into a woman, causing his soul to be thrown out of body. Because if he goes more than 100m away from his body, his soul will vanish and die. So, Young Min quickly begged Sung-tak to save him. But Sung-tak only paid attention to the fainted woman. It seemed like she had some very serious illness. Young Min's two hands are about to disappear. If he keeps this up, he will die in just a few seconds. Suddenly, Sung-tak told Young Min to enter his body to save this patient. Sung-tak then reached out his hand towards Young Min. Young Min quickly touched his hand to let his soul enter Sung-tak's body. Thanks to that, Young Min kept his soul. After merging, Young Min controlled Sung-tak's body to sterilize the cutlery, then inject blood from the nerve tumor right in the middle of the street, helping the patient overcome the critical condition in time. The woman was then taken to the emergency hospital. Taehyun was amazed that Sung-tak was able to handle this situation. Moreover, in the middle of the road, there was a lack of medical equipment. More and more, the colleagues admire Sung-tak. Young Min's coma caused the hospital to lack good doctors, so serious patients were also delayed in their surgery schedules. Among the cases was a child with a history of underlying medical conditions, whose health was so weak that no other doctors dared to perform surgery. At that time, Young Min himself refused to operate on the boy. He even spurned the boy's hand away. Now looking back at this boy, Young Min feels even more regretful. Since then, Young Min has been more active in entering his soul into Sung-tak's body to help Sung-tak handle many serious emergency cases, despite the fact that it is extremely dangerous to enter souls into other people's bodies many times. Uncle Tef saw it and also worried about Young Min's soul. Young Min saved many people that day, so the souls who hated him before now love him. Unexpectedly, when he returned to the hospital room, he couldn't find his body anywhere. It turned out that Sejin moved him to the VIP room. From now on, she will stay here to take care of Youngmin and take care of her father. Unfortunately, the jerk director also likes Sejin. He came up with the idea of wanting to possess Sejin as much as possible. Youngmin found him rude, but couldn't do anything. One day, Sejin read the newspaper and saw that her father had regained consciousness. In fact, Jin-suk intentionally spread rumors to sell stocks. Sejin immediately went to find his father, but his brother still prevented her from entering. Youngmin went inside and discovered that the president was still in a coma. Jin-suk announced that he would sell the stock when it was at its peak, wait until his father died, and then the stock would decrease so he could take the money to buy it. Later, Youngmin followed Taehyun to find out the truth and discovered that Taehyun was an accomplice of the director and the evil son. The director appointed Taehyun to take over and take care of Sejin's father with the task of removing the breathing tube when needed. In return, Taehyun will soon be promoted to professor. Knowing the truth, Youngmin was extremely angry. He chased and beat Taehyun, but it had no effect. Youngmin felt guilty, so he quickly went to apologize to Sejin's father. He promised to find a way to help the president fight against the unfilial son. That night, Youngmin's soul entered Sung-tak's body to find Taehyun and tell all his secrets. Sung-tak threatens him to not do dirty things if he wants to live. Taehyun was extremely scared. He quickly ran out to chase Sung-tak and asked how you knew that, but Sung-tak was bewildered and didn't understand what was going on. Sung-tak was afraid of being exposed, so he went to the control room and asked to delete the video, so when Taehyun came to watch, he could no longer see anything. Back in the hospital room, Sejin says Youngmin's brain condition is worsening day by day. Youngmin remembered that Uncle Teth once said that possessing too much of a living person would cause the comatose soul to not be able to return to the body, at which point he would have to be a ghost forever, afraid of dying, so Youngmin quickly escaped Sung-tak's body. He saw his ex-girlfriend crying because she was afraid he would die. Sejin promises that if he wakes up, she will stay with him forever. Hearing this sentence, Youngmin vowed not to enter another person's body again. At this time, a black soul appeared in the hospital. Other souls saw it and were frightened. He is the soul of the delivery man. Later at the hospital, they received an extremely critical patient. Youngmin looked at him and immediately knew that this was a difficult case due to a heart attack. This difficult case caused Professor Taehyun to refuse treatment. Taehyun suggested letting Sung-tak perform the surgery. Sung-tak is worried because he doesn't know how to operate, but when he looked at the pitiful victim's wife and children, Sung-tak agreed to perform this surgery. He ordered the patient to be quickly taken to the operating room, in fact to Youngmin's soul to enter his body. But Youngmin just swore to Sejin, so he can't do that anymore. Therefore, Sung-tak had to do the surgery himself. When the surgery began, both the doctor and the director came to observe. Sung-tak was bewildered for a moment, not knowing what to do. He was clumsy, even holding a scalpel. A moment later, he suddenly turned towards Youngmin. He begged Youngmin to enter his body for the patient's sake. Youngmin now knew that Sung-tak had always seen him, but had always pretended not to see him. Youngmin was so surprised that he was overwhelmed. It turns out that Sung-tak has had the ability to see ghosts since he was young. At that time, he saw a mother who couldn't pick up a shoe. Sung-tak was not afraid and picked up the shoe to help the ghost. Seeing that he sincerely begged, Youngmin had to ignore everything and enter on Sung-tak's body. But this scene made many onlookers suspicious. Immediately after that, Sung-tak confidently performed the surgery. Still turning his hand as always, Sung-tak's movements holding the scalpel are indescribably skillful. The surgery was a complete success, surprising everyone. After finished the surgery, the two of them talking privately, Sung-tak said he not only saw Youngmin but all the other souls. Youngmin feels deceived because Sung-tak has been ignoring him for a long time, causing Youngmin to enter Sung-tak's body countless times without knowing. The two argued fiercely with statements of victory and defeat. After arguing, the two people stopped playing the body incarnation game. Since the miraculously successful surgery, everyone has wondered why Sung-tak is a trainee but so good like that. The director also asked to review the video of the surgery that Sung-tak just did. The next day, suddenly reporters rushed to find Sung-tak. It turns out that director Han posted the news that Sung-tak has excellent surgical ability online. Because he thought his younger brother was just lucky, in the future Sung-tak encountered a difficult case, and if he couldn't handle it, he would be severely criticized. Sung-tak hates this brother very much. It turns out the two brothers are competing for inheritance. Ever since Youngmin and Sung-tak got angry with each other, Sung-tak started having clumsy days alone. He was clumsy when performing operations with the patient. Even removing the drain failed. Youngmin saw but refused to help, so dissatisfied Sung-tak decided to take revenge. He opened the window and threw away Youngmin's best vest. No matter how much Youngmin begged, Sung-tak still dropped the vest on the street. The two people hate each other more and and more each day. At this time, the black soul of the delivery man became increasingly stronger. This person is always following Youngmin, and he doesn't know anything. As for Sejin, every day she tried bringing the food her father was allergic to the bodyguards, and they replied that he had eaten it all. After hearing this, Sejin immediately knew that her father had never woken up. Dad's soul was afraid that the more Sejin investigated, the more danger would be in, so his soul talked to Youngmin's soul. The chairman wants to ask Youngmin to take care of his youngest daughter. At that moment, Taehyun came in and gave the chairman an injection, which was poison to maintain the chairman's coma. The chairman knows that his son has a big plan, so he wants to ask Youngmin to protect his daughter. On this side, the body of the delivery man who caused Youngmin's accident is in critical condition. Fortunately, Sejin came to the emergency room in time. The delivery man's soul suddenly appeared and begged Youngmin to save him. He told Youngmin all the truth. That day, because of money, he caused an accident for Youngmin. Unexpectedly, it put himself in a critical situation. He knelt down and asked Youngmin for forgiveness. Youngmin's questions were gradually revealed. Furthermore, Youngmin eavesdropped on the conversation between Director Han and Sejin and learned that it was Director Han who borrowed Sejin's phone to text to meet him on the day of the accident. Therefore, Youngmin must investigate and exonerate himself. Here, the seriously ill boy is begging Sungtak for surgery. Sungtak is extremely heartbroken, but he is unable to do that. Only Youngmin can do this difficult case now. The boy then ran to hug his mother and cried, making Sungtak even more heartbroken. So he found Youngmin and wanted Youngmin's soul to enter his body, and Youngmin will operate on the child, and Sungtak will help Youngmin investigate the truth of his accident. The two quickly reconciled and agreed to cooperate. At this moment, there was an emergency patient, but the wife kept scolding him. It turned out that the victim went to the mountain to have an affair and fell down. Seeing that this case was troublesome, Youngmin took the initiative to leave. But stupid Sungtak deliberately wanted to enter Youngmin's soul and come to save people. But as a result, the wife grabbed his hair. It hurt. At this time, the patient was unconscious and needed emergency treatment. Everyone immediately took the wife out so Youngmin could work. The extremely talented Youngmin successfully cured the patient. After surgery, the patient was taken to the recovery room. Unexpectedly, the lover's husband came here to take revenge. Youngmin was very smart and quickly got out of Sungtak's body as the doctor who saved that man, so Sungtak was beaten. After this hurt incident, Sungtak was angry with Youngmin again. Unexpectedly, this scene was recorded by the camera and the director saw it. He asked the security guard to send him videos about Sungtak every day. At this time, there was a girl outside crying bitterly, asking for her brother's hospital bill to be reduced. She is the delivery man's sister. To earn money for her brother's medical bills, she had to work until she was exhausted. The delivery man promised Youngmin that if he could wake up, he would be a witness to Youngmin's accident. This is an opportunity for Youngmin to expose the director's plot. But before Youngmin could do anything, the director started flirting with Sejin. It turns out that many years ago, he really liked Sejin. Watching her take a grain of rice from her hair and eat it, the director was fascinated. That afternoon, he brought food to flirt with Sejin, but saw her resting her head on Youngmin. The lunchbox had to be thrown in the trash. Now that he has put Youngmin into a coma, Sejin must be his. At the same time, Sungtak tricked Taehyun into going somewhere else so he could replace Taehyun and inject the president with medicine. Sungtak pretended to be confused, making the two bodyguards not pay attention, and Sejin successfully sneaked into the hospital room. When the security guard went out, Sejin sneaked in to see her father. Seeing her father motionless and haggard on the bed was extremely heartbreaking. Now she is sure that her evil brother harmed her father. Moments later, Sejin came out, surprising the two bodyguards. She said that if they didn't want to lose their job, they should keep this a secret, and next time, don't stop her from entering. Sungtak tells Sejin the truth about the delivery man causing Youngmin's accident. So Sejin decided to be in charge of treating the delivery man. Today is the day the boy with a serious illness is operated on. Sungtak took the boy into the operating room. At this time, Youngmin also followed, but unexpectedly he was blocked by a limited wall. While the surgery had begun, Sungtak was confused and didn't know what to do. It turned out that at this time, Youngmin's body was being taken for a scan, causing his body to exceed the 100 mm limit to the operating room. So Taehyun will be in charge of this surgery, and Sungtak will be the assistant. But he has not yet had Youngmin's soul enter his body, so he is very worried. He clumsily dropped the electric knife, then accidentally touched his hand to the ground. As a result, he were kicked out and disinfected before being allowed in. When the situation was critical, Youngmin quickly went to find Uncle Teth's souls. Here, Uncle Teth, in the picture of the cleaning lady, agreed to help. She went to the imaging room to take his body away. Thanks to that, Youngmin was able to get close to the operating room. On this side, Sungtak was clumsy and was constantly scolded. Youngmin promptly appeared here at the critical moment. Youngmin's soul begins to enter Sungtak's Sung-tak's body. Sung-tak immediately changed and performed extremely skillful operations. That made Taehyun start to feel confused. He couldn't even do the basic steps, so Sung-tak asked Taehyun to stay behind so he could do it. If something happens to the patient, Taehyun's professor chair will be blown away. After hearing this, Taehyun was scared, so he gave his seat to Sung-tak. Artificial heart replacement is an extremely difficult and rare technique. Young Min has done it before, so he is very skilled. The dean was extremely surprised. After the surgery, the two young men lay down laughing as if they had won the lottery. But Sejin inside received shocking news from a foreign colleague. The professor read Young Min's test results, which showed that he had no more than a month to live. This makes Sejin extremely sad. That night, Young Min stayed up all night waiting for the baby to wake up. When he saw the baby's eyes open, he was so happy that he cried. This has never happened to an arrogant person like Young Min. At the same time, Young Min wrote a report about the boy's surgery last night, but Sung-tak didn't know Young Min wrote it. When he found out, he quickly ran back to his room to open the computer and delete the report. Unexpectedly, Taehyun had printed it out before. Taehyun discovers that Sung-tak's report is identical to Young Min's previous report. Taehyun began to panic, wondering if Sung-tak was really possessed by Young Min's ghost. On this side, Sung-tak was afraid of being exposed, so he scolded Young Min's soul. While arguing with Young Min's soul, his mother came here. The mother accidentally saw Sung-tak talking alone, looking very scary. Because Young Min had been talking to ghosts since he was a child, his mother thought he was sick. On this side, Sung-tak came to remove the drainage tube for the pediatric patient. Many curious people came to see him because they heard he was very talented. Unexpectedly, the boy opened his eyes and saw Young Min's soul. The boy asked why he got into Sung-tak's body. Young Min panicked and caused the drainage tube to fall out. Everyone was disappointed to see that. On this side, Sejin saw the delivery man in a coma and didn't woke up yet. While checking, everything was normal. She was wondering and didn't understand when suddenly the cleaning lady screamed loudly because the trash can lid didn't fit the bin. The cleaning lady had to check to see if there were any dents anywhere. Sejin understood the meaning of that, so removing the bandage on the delivery man's head, and sure enough, she saw a blockage there. On this side, Sung-tak knows about Young Min secretly borrowing his body and then performing heart surgery on a singer. Sung-tak knows that if Young Min continues to enter his body, Young Min will not be able to return to body, so he angrily scolded Young Min. At this time, it was time for the singer to have a second heart transplant. Last time, Young Min himself performed heart surgery for her because no one else had been able to do this except him. On the day of surgery, Young Min was already blouse and the female singer was also taken into the anesthesia room. Unexpectedly that day, Sung-tak suddenly disappeared, so the surgery was forced to have Taehyun replace him. Young Min stood next to him, extremely worried, because this was the patient who had his heart valve replaced 10 years ago. This second heart valve replacement is 10,000 times more difficult. Young Min stood next to him extremely worried, and finally, what he was afraid of happened. Taehyun accidentally touched and ruptured the coronary artery. The patient's blood pressure began to drop sharply. Young Min was helpless, but couldn't do anything. At this critical moment, Sung-tak appeared, so Young Min's soul entered Sung-tak's body and skillfully corrected Taehyun's mistakes. Thanks to that, the surgery was successful. But after leaving the operating room, Sung-tak asked to end the contract with Young Min. From now on, he will not let Young Min's soul enter his body anymore, because he knows that if Young Min enters soul again, Young Min will really die. Sung-tak's mother was reviewing videos related to her son. She asked the staff to delete them all. Unexpectedly, Director Han copied everything onto a USB and wanted to use it to hijack the inheritance. Today, Sung-tak decided to cancel his contract with Young Min. He doesn't want Young Min to die, but unfortunately the hospital welcomed a patient with a ruptured abdominal aorta. The hospital no longer had a doctor who could perform the surgery, so they were forced to refuse to accept the patient and transfer the patient to another hospital. Suddenly, Sung-tak used his hand to block the hospital bed. This image is identical to Young Min 10 years ago. That day, he himself saved such a patient. At this time, both Young Min and Sung-tak had the same thought, which was to perform surgery to help this patient. As for the consequences, they will calculate later. Because Young Min knows he has to die sooner or later, he wants to use the little time he has left to save people. After they successfully operated on the patient, Sejin announced that the delivery person had also regained consciousness. Young Min hopes he tells the whole truth, both exposing the director's crimes and exonerating Young Min. Unexpectedly, he did not remember the previous contract. Young Min was extremely angry. At the same time, Director Han also let someone pay all the hospital bills, as if bribing the delivery person, so he wouldn't tell the truth. In vain, they spent so much effort to save him, yet he did just that. While Young Min was angry and wanted to swallow him alive, suddenly, Uncle Teth's spirit appeared and told him that anyone who wakes up cannot remember what their soul has ever done. That means that the real delivery man will not remember anything, and now blame him was not meaning. anything. So Sung-tak went to remind the delivery man that the day the accident happened, he was hired by Director Han to stab Young Min. After hearing this, the delivery man was extremely scared. That day, Sejin's father's soul sat and talked with Young Min's soul. He asked Young Min to help punish his unfilial son. So the next day, journalists flocked to interview the son. It turned out that the photo of the father in a coma had been posted online. This method was as successful as expected. People involved in the scandal immediately went to the president's hospital room. Both the hospital director and Tae-hyun were also present. Sejin called his father's lawyer, who was the keeper of the will, and the lawyer began to announce the president's will. At the same time, a do not resuscitate order was issued, meaning that if his heart stopped beating, the will would be valid. That's why the new son kept him in a coma, because if the president died, he would lose everything. After this scandal, Director Han was heavily criticized by Sung-tak's mother. Whether the patient is awake or not, you can't be confused. Seeing that the incident could not be covered up, he had to blame Tae-hyun. Sejin personally took his father to have his heart and lungs checked, while his soul stayed to play with Uncle Teth's soul. It seems that this will be the last game in the president's life. Sejin checked to see that her father had no signs of life anymore. Both his heart and lungs had stopped working. She cried a lot because she couldn't bear it. Now she had to carry out a do not resuscitate order. Even though didn't want to, Sejin still had to take out the breathing tube to declare his father's death. At that moment, his soul also disappeared. On the day of the funeral, Young Min's soul entered Sung-tak's soul again to visit him. Young Min knew he didn't have much longer to live, so he decided to work with Sung-tak on all the untreated cases. The hospital board naturally agrees with this. The two of them worked so crazy that they didn't take a break for several days. While Sung-tak felt extremely tired, Young Min's soul appeared full of energy. Because Young Min is a soul, he doesn't get tired. However, whenever an emergency patient arrived, the two of them enthusiastically ran quickly to help them. At the same time, Tae-hyun tried to harm Young Min. He gave the report that Sung-tak once wrote to Director Han. Tae-hyun is certain that this report was written by Young Min. Tae-hyun confirmed that the director's younger brother was possessed by Young Min's ghost. Director Han didn't believe it at first, but suddenly he heard that his grandfather was coming to the hospital, so he rushed home. Unexpectedly, as soon as he met his grandfather, the grandfather scolded Director Han for letting Sung-tak work so hard. Knowing that Professor Young Min is in a coma and lacks a surgeon, why not find a good doctor to replace him? Personnel is also worried that if it can't be done, you should quickly resign. That night, Young Min went to visit Sejin and found her crying. She was miserable because her father had just gone away, so Young Min could not afford to treat her like that. Did he just lie there in a coma, waiting for her to declare her death to him? When Young Min saw her crying, he was also extremely sad. He regretted that he couldn't help her. At this moment, he saw Sung-tak coming, so his soul immediately entered Sa and went into the room. Young Min used Sung-tak's hand to cover Sejin with a blanket, and he didn't forget to caress her face. In her dream, Sejin was also dreaming of Young Min. She dreamily asked him if he was really there. Sejin suddenly sat up and the two hugged each other. Unexpectedly, thanks to that happy feeling, Young Min's body had brainwaves stimulated. Young Min happily informed Sung-tak that he was about to have a chance to wake up. Sung-tak hurriedly ran to ask Sejin if Young Min had brainwaves. This makes Sejin suspicious as to why Sung-tak knows. Sung-tak had to lie and say he dreamed about it. Because of the ability to wake up, Young Min loves life even more. Every day he asks Sung-tak to come and remind Sejin to eat. Sung-tak's sudden interest in her made Sejin feel confused. She remembered clearly hearing Young Min's singing voice last night, but when she opened her eyes, she saw that it was Sung-tak. But when hugged him, she felt like it was really Young Min. Sejin remembered that last night Sung-tak stroked her hair. This was really strange. Director Han's side began to suspect that Sung-tak's younger brother was possessed by Young Min's soul. He often secretly watched his younger brother perform surgery, and indeed realized that his skillful operation was identical to Young Min's. Moreover, that day, he caught his younger brother carrying Young Min's body away. Apparently, Sung-tak was possessed by Young Min's soul. On this side, Sung-tak goes to help a female ghost who likes to read books, while her body is still in a coma in her own room. Sung-tak checked the medical record and found out that due to lack of sleep, she hit her head on the edge of the table and fell into a coma, but it's unclear what the underlying cause is that keeps her from waking up. So Young Min went directly to ask for her soul. Through that, he knew that when she fell, her nose bled. Sung-tak immediately informed this to Sejin. Sejin suddenly realized that it was telangiectasia syndrome and that the fall had caused her a central nervous system infection. Sejin wondered even more why Sung-tak knew that mysterious thing. If brain surgery is performed, the patient has a chance to regain consciousness, but the brain surgery procedure is dangerous, so the treating doctor hesitates. Sejin affirmed that this was the only option to help the patient regain consciousness. Her determination convinced the doctor to agree. When the girl's soul heard the news, she was extremely happy, but during the critical moment, the director Han played a trick to expose the story story of Young Min's soul entering Sung Tak's body. He arranged for Sung Tak to have surgery on a torn heart valve, then came to observe directly. He let Tae Hyun be his assistant to watch closely, to confirm whether Sung Tak was really possessed by Professor Young Min or not. Young Min still rotated his wrist before surgery as always. Every operation was extremely skillful, especially the habit of using the left hand to sew. Taehyun admitted that all the operations were done exactly the same, no difference at all. The outside director was also extremely surprised, and just to be sure he called Sejin to create a distraction. Taehyun deliberately asked a question that only Young Min knew. Sung Tak unconsciously answered, so revealing his identity. When Young Min discovered he had been set up, it was too late. Now they know that Young Min's soul entered Sung Tak. Knowing that he could not hide this from Director Han, Young Min frankly admitted that Sung Tak's body was being controlled by the soul of Professor Young Min. But isn't Young Min his money printing machine? So please obediently wait for Young Min to wake up and don't hurt me, because the secret between Director Han and Tycoon's son Young Min knew everything. Director Han was speechless and couldn't say anything. Young Min, in the form of Sung Tak, leisurely left. After that conversation, Director Han began to be haunted by the existence of ghosts. Even when talking, he didn't dare to speak because he was afraid that Young Min was listening. Young Min also told Sung Tak that Director Han knew everything. Sung Tak confided that in the past he had an accident that almost killed him, and since then he suddenly had the ability to see ghosts. When he was a child, he was extremely scared and ran away. But then Sung Tak pretended not to see it, so it was okay. However, when operating on patients, their souls appeared and scared him immensely. That's why Sung Tak always gives up surgical practice. Therefore, he is always the one who hopes Young Min wakes up the soonest. The two people talking were unfortunately overheard by Director Han. Waiting for Sejin to go out of the room while busy on the phone, Han sneaked in and intended to remove Young Min's breathing tube. Because if Young Min dies, everything will end. No one will be able to threaten him anymore. But thinking he would lose the money printing machine, he didn't do it anymore. That night, Director Han came home and asked Sung Tak why he helped the ghost. Sung Tak didn't explain much and wanted to cooperate with Director Han. If Director Han repented, Sung Tak would forgive him. Unexpectedly, Director Han threatened Sung Tak in return. So what if Young Min dies? The next morning, Sung Tak quickly ran to the hospital to find Young Min. Luckily, he's okay. Today is the day Sejin had surgery. Sejin is the main doctor performing this surgery. Although this surgery was successful, she still needs treatment for a while longer. When the infections on the brain heal completely, the patient can regain consciousness. Knowing that happiness can help Young Min wake up faster, Sung Tak carefully asked his colleagues to watch over Young Min's body, and he bought Sejin a ticket to see a concert, and at the same time allowed Young Min's soul to enter his body to go see it with Sejin. So that day, Young Min, in the form of Sung Tak and Sejin, went to see a concert. When the two sat next to each other, Sejin's student memories suddenly appeared. Even though circumstances were poor, they always had each other. Leaving the theater, Sejin curiously asked why Sung Tak chose to be a surgeon. He answered because he once promised a girl to do that, and she worked as a neurologist. This answer was exactly like the promise between her and Young Min the day before. Sejin suddenly froze. She didn't understand why Sung Tak knew that. Since the day Young Min's soul entered Sung Tak's body, his life has encountered many troubles. The pediatric patient they had operated on suddenly had his soul leave his body to find Professor Young Min. The boy's body was unconscious on the floor and was being treated by a female nurse. After Sung Tak ran over, she suddenly asked the ghost of Professor Young Min if he was nearby. The question surprised them greatly. They did not expect that she already knew about the soul possession between Professor Young Min and Sung Tak. Although the nurse did not see the ghost, she spoke confidently. Because she noticed that only Professor Young Min warmed up his hands before surgery, the two of them returned to observe the boy and discovered that he needed another surgery to change the position of the artificial valve. But Sung Tak is an intern, so he doesn't have the authority to preside. He called on other professors to accept this surgery. Unexpectedly, they all refused. Even for other surgeries, they removed Sung Tak's name from the AKIP. These things were all done by Director Han. Sung Tak was extremely angry but couldn't do anything. Young Min originally had a charity fund dedicated to helping pay hospital fees for the heart surgeries he was in charge of, and this boy was also on that list. The head of the department said that if the boy was not operated on soon, he would not be able to wake up. He came to ask Director Han to operate on the boy, but Director Han used private matters to take revenge. All patients in charge of Young Min must suspend medical examination. As for the fund money, it will be transferred directly to the fund that Director Han is in charge of. The head of the department couldn't help but be shocked. How could he trade a patient's life for money like that? At the same time, the boy's soul ran to hug his mother, but could not. When he saw his body on the bed, the boy burst into tears, making Sung Tak unable to bear it. So, he cooperated with the dean and other professors to create a scene to trick Director Han. Everyone changed their working hours, waiting for the day the boy boy was to be operated on, but only Song-tak had an empty schedule. Therefore, Song-tak was allowed to enter the operating room as an assistant. Director Han sat outside watching to see if it was Young Min or Song-tak. Unexpectedly, during the surgery, Song-tak's hand kept shaking. It seems that the connection between soul and body is unstable, which is extremely dangerous for the surgery. The dean and director Han outside were also nervous for him. Young Min had to try to remember the promise to help this boy return to see his mother again. But unexpectedly, this phenomenon still happened. It was very difficult to complete the surgery. After the surgery, Young Min quickly ran out. He asked Uncle Teth why today when the soul entered Song-tak, he kept having problems. But Uncle Teth didn't understand why. What's even more strange is that Song-tak suddenly remembered the surgery, but before, when Young Min's soul entered, he couldn't remember anything. The boy's soul was about to wake up and immediately went to see Young Min. The boy asked Young Min that he help the boy to wake up, so did Young Min wake up with the boy? This statement seemed to crush Young Min's heart. He really want to, but he can't. Uncle and nephew hugged each other. Suddenly, the boy's soul disappeared. Young Min rushed to the hospital room and the baby woke up, but now the boy can only see and touch Song-tak, and Song-tak carelessly teased Young Min. Young Min left heartbroken. He shouted angrily because he was a vegetable, so no matter what he did, only Song-tak would inherit it. Young Min sadly returned to his room, seeing Se-jin falling asleep next to his body, another thing that made him extremely miserable. Young Min burst into tears like a child. Why is everyone so miserable because of him? He scolded his body to wake up, intending to lie there and torment everyone for how long. Outside, Song-tak heard everything. He was also heartbroken for Young Min. The next day, Se-jin's brother suddenly returned to the hospital. He rushed straight into Young Min's hospital room to see Se-jin. Young Min's soul standing next to him heard something extremely shocking. It turns out that in the past her brother deliberately forced Se-jin to go to America. Otherwise, he would have someone break Young Min's arm. That day, he hired a group of thugs to warn Young Min. They threatened to make Young Min's hand unable to be operated on. Today, he came here to cause trouble again. He wanted to force his sister to sign a paper refusing to inherit the father's property. Young Min helplessly watched Se-jin struggle with her evil brother. Luckily, Song-tak ran there in time. Young Min's soul entered Song-tak's body and grabbed Jin-suk's collar. Then he punched this evil brother straight in the face. At this time, the hospital director appeared. They pulled each other back to the room to continue discussing plans to kill people. However, Director Han wanted to withdraw from the plan. He didn't want anything to do with Se-jin's brother anymore. Seeing this, Jin-suk immediately threatened to reveal the hospital that killed Young Min and his father. After hearing this, Director Han was extremely scared. Uncle Teth found out the reason when Young Min's soul entered Song's body have problems. The reason is because Young Min's comatose body has gotten better, so his soul occasionally fluctuates to return to his body. Now if they continue to let our souls enter our bodies, the souls of both people will be disturbed. Therefore, Young Min was forced to stop merging with Song-tak. Therefore, the surgeries had to be temporarily postponed. Song-tak sees that himself as a doctor, but if he can't help patients, then life is meaningless. So he studied like crazy day and night. At this time, Director Han met Taehyun. He said that a patient who had just improved suddenly died overnight. What if he used this method to deal with Young Min? At the same time, Song-tak went to Se-jin and confessed everything. The actions that she felt familiar with him were because Young Min had entered Song-tak's body. Young Min noticed and quickly shouted to stop. If he don't stop, Young Min will enter Song-tak's body. Song-tak had to leave, leaving Se-jin in the room extremely confused. Outside, two people argued for a while. When Young Min turned around, he saw Se-jin lying on the floor. He quickly used Song-tak's body to carry Se-jin to the emergency room. It turns out Se-jin was overworked and lacking sleep, so she fainted. At the same time, Taehyun returned to the hospital. According to Director Han's orders, he will assassinate Young Min today. Taehyun went to the hospital room to assassinate Young Min's body, but Song-tak had arranged for bodyguards, so he couldn't do anything yet. Young Min's soul entered Song-tak's body and personally cooked the dishes that Se-jin liked to eat, then took her shopping for clothes. Se-jin once again felt that she was very close to Young Min. Emotions were so overwhelming that she couldn't hold back her tears. The next day, Song-tak went home to help his mother supervise the plumbing workers. He picked up the faucet and accidentally sprayed it everywhere. Song-tak suddenly understood something and rushed to the hospital. He found out the cause of Young Min's deep coma, which was due to the blood flow to Young Min's brain being compressed. They immediately took Young Min's body for a CT scan. Sure enough, it was discovered that the artery was being compressed. Because she was so happy, Se-jin hugged Song-tak. Young Min quickly entered his body to enjoy this happy feeling. Song-tak then opened a faculty meeting to announce this. He confidently explained every detail, making the professors admire him. The head of the department immediately said, "So let's schedule the surgery." Song-tak asked the head of the department to be the main surgeon, and he would assist as an assistant. The two scheduled surgery for Young Min tomorrow morning. But Young Min is worried because Uncle Teth has told him not to enter the soul anymore, because yesterday when he went shopping with Se-jin, his soul was also disturbed. If during brain surgery the connection between the body and flickered again, it is very dangerous. Young Min decided to teach everything to Song-tak. At least if something goes wrong, he can handle it. On this side, Director Han knows that Song-tak will be an assistant for this surgery. He suddenly remembered that recently Young Min had been having trouble while possessing soul, so he immediately hatched an evil plan. At this time, a patient had a ruptured aorta, causing blood to flow non-stop, but currently the hospital no longer has any surgeons on duty. Song-tak couldn't help but accept this surgery. That made Young Min very upset. I told you being possessed now is very dangerous. If there is a problem during surgery, the patient can lose his life. However, Song-tak was still very stubborn. He's still to proceed with the surgery. Entering the operating room, Song-tak was confused and didn't know what to do. While the victim's blood pressure continued to drop, Young Min's soul outside was extremely worried. Song-tak looked out the window for help. When the machine reported that the patient was about to die, Young Min took the risk of entering his soul into Song-tak's body to continue the surgery. The operations are extremely skillful. Thought this patient would be saved, but unexpectedly, as the surgery was about to end, Young Min's soul was pushed out of Song-tak's body. Song-tak doesn't know what to do next. Young Min quickly reached out to re-enter Song-tak's body, but couldn't anymore. In a critical moment, Uncle Teth ran in and yelled at Song-tak to continue the surgery, but now it was too late. The patient's heartbeat was no longer there. The patient's soul stood looking at them. Song-tak was dumbfounded because he had just lost a person's life. He couldn't stand it, so he ran out. The surgery failed, so Director Han called the department head to investigate. However, the head of the department said this was not a medical incident because the patient's aorta had already ruptured before that. Song-tak wanted to save the patient, so he performed the surgery. Everyone protected Song-tak, making Director Han mad, but couldn't do anything. After that incident, Song-tak was so shocked that he cut off contact with everyone. The mother was worried about her son, so she searched everywhere. Director Han saw this and immediately said that it was because she forced him to become a doctor. If you love Song-tak, let him come home. Then Director Han and two people discussed how to kill Young Min. He told Taehyun to perform Young Min's surgery like it was an accident. That is to let Young Min die before being taken into the operating room. Then Taehyun will not be held responsible. Since Song-tak is not here, he will let Taehyun take Song-tak's place. They also prepared wine to drink to celebrate Young Min's death. Young Min's soul was nearby and heard everything. The urgent thing now is to find Song-tak and return. The nurse went to the house and met Song-tak there. Unexpectedly, he had already prepared his resignation letter and asked her to bring it and submit it for her. But on this side, Young Min's soul did not give up. He firmly believes that Uncle Teth's ghost is the one who possessed him 12 years ago. He begged Uncle Teth to help him, so Uncle Teth devised a plan to call Song-tak back. But the mother's side has now agreed to let Song-tak quit his job. Both mother and daughter planned to travel far away. At this time, Se-jin had someone calling, so she had to leave quickly. Unexpectedly, just a short distance away, the nurse called to say that Young Min was in danger. Se-jin returned to find that someone had lowered his bed, causing water to flow back inside, causing pneumonia. A colleague reported this news to Song-tak, and upon hearing that, he immediately canceled his return flight. Unexpectedly, when he returned to the hospital, he found out that this was Young Min's trick to get Song-tak to return. This makes Song-tak very angry. Back home, Song-tak receives a text message that Young Min's surgery has been postponed indefinitely. Song-tak suddenly felt very sad. Song-tak recalls Young Min being able to save many patients because he entered his body. If they lose a talented person like Young Min, there will be many patients who cannot be saved. Unexpectedly, the next day, the colleagues told him that Young Min had to be transferred to the hospital. After hearing this, Song-tak wanted to rush back to the hospital, but suddenly, next to him, a baby fell to the ground unconscious. The dean appeared and asked about the illness of the baby from the mother. Suddenly, Uncle Teth's soul entered a person who ran to buy first aid equipment. When he brought it back, Uncle Teth entered his soul to the head of the department to give first aid to the boy. Thanks to a few small tricks, the boy was saved in time. It turns out that Uncle Teth was also a very good doctor. When finished, Song-tak rushed in to stop Se-jin from moving Young Min away. He promised to fight with Young Min until everything was over. The next day, Song-tak brought all his belongings to the hospital to stay. He hired more bodyguards to guard Song-tak's hospital room in case something bad happened. After that, he followed Young Min's soul every day to ask about surgery. He wanted to use his own hands to save patients. The first step is to stitch a simple incision on the head pillow, so Song-tak practiced day and night. Next is learning to insert a tracheal tube. Looking at Song-tak's clumsiness, Young Min helplessly said that if he did this, the patient had died already. Song-tak is so diligent that he spends his entire lunch hour practicing picking up each grain of rice, with the aim of practicing his skillful hands. Gradually practice suturing blood vessels with balloons. victims. At first, Song Tak was clumsy, making Young Min angry, but with perseverance, he finally succeeded. Song Tak moves on to practice on the model heart. He stayed up all night so tired that he fell asleep on the table. Unfortunately, the hospital suddenly received many emergency cases due to a series of traffic accidents. Among them was the most serious patient. Song Tak courageously took this case. Young Min stood next to guide Song Tak little by little. The trainee practiced with his true strength for the first time. He sewed the patient's wound himself. Everything went smoothly at first, but at this moment someone had a cardiac arrest. The doctors on duty tried very hard but failed. The victim's soul appeared, causing Song Tak to freeze. The doctors have officially given up. This patient's soul is also about to disappear. However, this time Young Min told Song Tak to try harder. He jumped onto the table and enthusiastically pressed the victim's chest with all his hope. Song Tak's face was extremely emotional. He stared at the ghost, determined to save this guy. This surprised everyone around. Very quickly, the victim's soul disappeared. This guy showed signs of life again. Song Tak breathed a sigh of relief. Se-jin stood next to observe everything. She began to have doubts. She remembered that Tae-Huin had said that Young Min's soul entered Song Tak's body. Plus, many times when she's with him, she feels like it's Young Min. Perhaps Young Min's soul entered that guy. Se-jin decided to verify this for herself. She immediately went to ask the nurse about the food that Song Tak didn't like. Then she deliberately invited him out to eat. Unexpectedly, Song Tak ate very well. This made Se-jin firmly believe that the person in front of her was Young Min. She happily said that from now on, she would invite him out to eat every day. Unexpectedly, two people were walking on the street when disaster struck. The older brother, who was always watching the two of them, came to cause trouble because he thought that Se-jin was dating Song Tak. He sent his juniors to secretly attack Young Min that made his soul out of Song Tak's body. Se-jin ran over and saw Song Tak had fainted. Young Min's soul is weak right next to him. Because there was his body didn't nearby, so Young Min's soul began to disappear. At this time, Se-jin suddenly called Young Min's name. She knew all the secrets between him and Song Tak. Se-jin quickly called the nurse to send an ambulance came here. Uncle Teth came here and saw that Young Min's soul was about to disappear. When in danger, he quickly possessed an employee, then picked up Song Tak's body and put it down for Young Min's soul to enter. Thanks to that, Young Min's soul was saved. When Young Min got in the car, he realized that Se-jin already knew everything. She looked at Song Tak with happiness. From that day on, Se-jin smiled happily every day. As for Young Min, he comes every day to ask Song Tak to convey his words to Se-jin. He even borrowed Song Tak's body to have lunch with Se-jin every day. Song Tak's lover see that, and extremely jealous, the girl intentionally slapped hard to push Young Min's soul out. The two girls started fighting over Song Tak's body. Seeing that something was wrong, they started to sit down and discuss. The two will take turns loving Song Tak. Only on odd days will Young Min borrow Sung Min's body to date Se-jin. And each time Se-jin borrow a body, it can't be more than 2 hours. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, Se-jin discovered that Young Min's white blood cell count had increased. After taking his body for testing, Se-jin said drug-resistant bacteria were spreading very quickly, making pneumonia more and more serious. There can be no more delay now. Song Tak immediately held a medical council meeting. This time, the illness was much more complicated than the last time, because in addition to surgery, infection is also involved. Just one mistake and will lose the life. If thoracic surgery is performed, it will be completely resolved, but 99% of the time, it will fail. Even though opening the neck area is safe, he will have to wear a neck tube for the rest of his life. Daily activities will be very cumbersome, and the tube can get clogged at any time. Young Min's soul and Song Tak go out to talk privately. They knew that if they had neck surgery, they could save his lives. But later, Young Min also lost the ability to save people. So Song Tak decided that even if he searches the earth, he must find the best doctor to help Young Min have thoracic surgery. He called all the best professors. But because Young Min is a famous doctor, no one dares to treatment for him. If anything goes wrong, they will have a reputation for life. Because there was no doctor to help him perform the surgery, so Young Min asked Song Tak to see Taehyun. Even though he knew that Taehyun had wanted to kill him several times, Young Min took the risk and asked Taehyun to join the surgery team. Dr. An also recognized that the person in front of him was Young Min's soul entering. Taehyun immediately went to see Director Han to ask him to operate on Young Min. Taking that opportunity, he will assassinate Young Min as promised. Director Han happily agreed to this, and Young Min's surgery was immediately performed. The head of the department and the best doctors are all here watching. Even Director Han came to watch. Taehyun was in charge of the surgery. He nodded at Director Han. Then Song Tak also entered the room as an assistant. The two nodded, signaling the surgery to begin. But suddenly Song Tak and Taehyun switched places, surprising everyone outside. Young Min's soul entered Song Tak's body. As always, he rotated his wrist before surgery, and at the same time Young Min announced to change the content of the surgery. That is to change from neck surgery, as originally, to thoracic surgery. It turned out that Taehyun had gone to Youngmin's office before. Taehyun sat crying because he regretted the bad things he did. That's why Youngmin trusted him. They acted together to trick Director Han into agreeing them to perform surgery on Youngmin. At the same time, the most difficult surgery in the history of medicine took place. Youngmin's soul performed surgery on himself. However, everything did not go smoothly because of the incident where Youngmin's soul entered Sungtak. His hands and feet trembled, causing blood to splatter. People outside were also extremely worried. Sungtak must be very brave to fight back. Each surgical cut is precise and rhythmic, thus promptly correcting errors. Even though his body was becoming more and more dizzy, Youngmin still tried to complete the surgery. Until the important part had just been sewn, suddenly, Youngmin's soul was extracted from Sungtak's body. Youngmin is now too weak to enter his soul into Sungtak's body anymore. Taehyun was supposed to do the rest, but unexpectedly, Youngmin directly asked Sungtak to do it. He wants to use his own body to help Sungtak overcome his fear, but this is Youngmin's body, so the pressure is heavy on Sungtak's shoulders. Youngmin next to him constantly encouraged Sungtak to calm down and guided him in everything. Sungtak carefully did everything quite well, causing Youngmin's soul to gradually fade away. After completing the surgical wound, Youngmin's soul returned to his body. The doctor announced that all indicators are stable. All the doctors were happy, but only Director Han was sad. After the surgery, the head of the department told Taehyun that Youngmin had recommended him many times to the position of professor, but Director Han did not approve because he discriminated against him for going to a school with no reputation. Director Han scolded Taehyun for not killing Youngmin. Taehyun said he wanted to atone for his mistakes, and he never wanted to live that evil again. That night, Sungtak was looking at his phone and discovered a video. At that time, Youngmin's soul entered his body and recorded it. Youngmin is afraid that when he wakes up, he will forget all the beautiful memories of when he was a soul, especially the fact that he once borrowed Sungtak's body. The video recounts everything in detail when Youngmin was the soul in 3 months. At the same time, Youngmin also woke up. Sungtak quickly ran over to show his joy. As expected, Youngmin doesn't remember anything. Sungtak was mercilessly chased away. Sejin brought flowers to give, but Youngmin forgot that he and Sejin had made up. He cruelly chased Sejin away because she abandoned him in the past. Sejin heard that and felt sad. She walked away with much sadness. Even when Sungtak came to help change the bandage, Youngmin refused, because in the past the two of them hated each other. A moment later, Director Han came to inquire. Seeing that Youngmin had forgotten everything, he was extremely happy. Suddenly, Youngmin said that he was so happy. Why didn't he bring out the bottle of wine from the previous day to drink to celebrate? Youngmin recounted all Director Han crimes. It turns out Youngmin didn't forget anything. Hearing that, Director Han was extremely worried and scared. While thinking about how to assassinate Youngmin, the police suddenly called to ask Director Han to assist in the investigation. It turned out that Taehyun had surrendered and provided all evidence that Director Han and Jin Suk harmed the patient. Taehyun has completed his atonement, so he is very at peace. Sejin's brother was also arrested for his crimes. The next day, Youngmin was able to walk with the tubes. Never before have he seen such beautiful sunlight. While being romantic, Sungtak came to cause trouble, so the two of them argued again. Sejin inherited all of her father's assets. She donated everything to charity and moved into Youngmin's house. The two of them hugged each other very happily. The next day, Youngmin immediately went to work. He always tried to cure the most difficult cases, and accompanying him is Sungtak, because everyone's health is precious, so don't wait until you lose it to appreciate it. The movie ends here. If you find it interesting, please subscribe to my support channel. Goodbye and see you again.